Let me get serious and say that on behalf of the Dominican Sisters of Peace, it gives me great pleasure and pride to welcome each and every one of you here. There's a reason why you're here. God selected you. Somehow your name was in the ether. And Sister Pat Duell and Sister Kathy Arnold and myself, we make a team in what we call Ministry of Welcome. And we've had the honor of working with this grant, which I'll say more about in a moment. But we received your names, and I contacted you, and to a person, you said, yes, I'm interested. I'd like to come. Count me in. So we're very glad you're here. And before we even asked you, we asked our key presenter, and I'll introduce her later, but that's Sister Arlene Flaherty. And we said, who would we like to do this? And we immediately thought of her. And we called, and lo and behold, the dates were open. And those were the September dates that got canceled. And then, somehow in God's providence, the February dates were open. And the same with Sister Ann, and I'll introduce both of them later. So we're all here because God wanted us to be here. And each and every one of us brings a special gift, and we warmly welcome that. And we ask you to put aside the cares of the day, all that, the anxiety of getting here, the ice, the rush hour traffic, the wolfing down your food. Just put it aside, and put aside your expectations. Let's just all go into this open to whatever it is the Spirit will help us to bring about. So that's a little bit of that welcome, and a bit about the context. Why are we doing this? Well, Dominican Sisters of Peace, a number of whom are here tonight, are 600 strong and about 500 plus associates. And we have talented sisters and associates among us, and a great commitment to bring the gospel to bear, to advance the reign of God in our world. And we'd like to make a special contribution to women, to offer young women opportunities for leadership around peace. And we have many gifts, as you do, but we couldn't presume to guess what those specific needs might be. So we thought, we will pick the brains of the brightest and the best, bring them in from around the country, and let them help us figure out what it is the Spirit might be inviting us to. And maybe you will all help us be a part of that as well, if something emerges and we take it forward. So that's a bit of the context. And we were blessed to receive a grant. And tomorrow you'll meet a young woman, Donna Vroom, who writes grants for us. And she called Kathy and Pat and myself, and she said, we're not going to get this grant, but dream big. I give you 24 hours. Get back to me with all the things you'd like. So we did. We took her at her word. We thought, what do we have to lose? We're not going to get this grant. Well, lo and behold, we got the grant. And so now we've been blessed to really try to use this grant wisely. We feel we have to be good caretakers of that grant. So you'll help us with that. But now before I will have a chance to introduce our keynote presenter later, but I'd like to say a little bit about my sister Ann here to my left. Ann Kilbride. She is, our dear sister, we start there, preacher par excellence, and a gifted facilitator. So again, she was one of the first people we thought of to ask, and she graciously consented. She works as the assistant to the president of one of our colleges in New Haven, Connecticut, Albertus Magnus College. She's the assistant to the president for mission effectiveness, for mission. So Ann, we're so glad that you're able to be with us along with Arlene. And I'll say more about Arlene later. I think I get to say it later, right? Okay.
And as we begin, I'd like to invite you to take a comfortable position. We come to you, God of everlasting peace. You are the source of life and beauty and power. Your Son Jesus is the way of faith, hope, and love. Your Spirit is the fire of love, the font of wisdom, the bond of unity. You call us at all times to be people of the Beatitudes and witnesses to the gospel of peace, love, and forgiveness. During our time together this weekend, Help us to renew our acceptance of your call, to help to bring the peace of the gospel to a divided world. We ask this through Christ our Lord, the Prince of Peace. Amen.
Well, welcome everyone. I look forward to getting to know each and every one of you as we go through the weekend. And we're all in a few minutes going to get to know each other a little bit better so that we can begin to form a community of peace. Peace does not happen by ourselves. Peace happens because we are in relationship with other people who value peace and want to live a peaceful life and to provide structures in our world and our various communities in which we live that bring about peace. But before we do that, let's just take a little look at what we're going to do tonight, because some people like to know the road that we will follow. So if you can look just over here at this little yellow sheet, and I apologize for the writing. In the congregation, I am known for having the poorest handwriting that God ever put on the earth. And the only thing they're going to say at my wake when I die is that we could never read anything she said. But, sometimes that's an advantage, right? That's right. You don't leave anything behind you. Just keep them guessing. But anyhow, later in the day, Bea came to my rescue. So you will notice as these move on during the weekend that they get a little better. Okay? But I'll help guide you through. But tonight is pretty simple, but it's very full. So we're going to have to work at staying awake because a lot of us have been traveling and, the energy sometimes can wane a little bit. Anyhow, we're going to do a little exercise of getting to know you, getting to know each other. We're actually even going to sing the song. And then we're going to take a first look at our goal and objectives. And we're going to try to hold ourselves to that goal and objectives. And we're going to keep going back to those and say, did we do this? Because remember, we are a think, use this, and our hearts and our voices to create a tank for the vocation team to be able to do a peace leadership program with young women. Now, when they first started on this venture, they said, well, the whole program. I said, in one weekend, we will give you pieces of a program, and then it'll have to be melded together. But you'll see that as we move on. And then we're going to look at some guidelines for our time together, because we all come from different experiences and different places, but how we can form a better community by how we are with each other. And then we're going to identify qualities and skills of a peacemaker. So some of you are going to be talking about yourselves, because you bring some of those qualities and skills to the group, and we're going to look at some other people who exemplify that. And the two we're going to highlight tonight are Dorothy Day and Martin Luther King Jr. And Sister Arlene's going to lead us through all that. And then we're going to look at the role of charity and justice in a peacemaker, both being very necessary for the peacemaker. But before we begin to do any of that, we need to know who the community is that's forming this weekend. So we are going to do this little exercise on getting to know you. So the first thing I would like you to do is to go and stand with someone you do not know well in this room. Arlene, I don't think we'll need you because I think we're an even number now, okay? So you have to go try to find somebody who you don't know. Then decide in your twosome who's going to be A and who's going to be B. Then I'd like you to open your folders and take out, there's a small sheet of paper there that has questions on it. And you're going to interview each other. So A will interview B, and then you'll hear a gong, and then B will interview A. And the questions are there. Give your name, where you're from, what are your current engagements, what are you involved in? And then why did you say yes to this invitation? Were you coerced? Were you freely allowed to say, yes, I want to do this? But why did you say yes? What intrigued you about doing this? Third thing, one thing you would like us all to know about you. It could be that you have a blue and a green eye. It could be that you are one of 7 children. It could be that you are a great runner. What is something that you want us to know about you? And the last one is, when you think about peace building, what image comes to mind, or what word, or what song, or what story when you think about being a peace builder? Don't overthink it. It doesn't have to be, it's just what comes to your mind. Okay? So I would like A to begin, and then after about 7 minutes or so, you will hear a little gong, and then we have to switch. If I feel you've all gone through the questions, then I'll do the gong a little bit earlier. Okay? Okay, go ahead. Do your interviews. Okay, now we'd like you to but to introduce us to the person that you talk to. So you're going to talk about the person that you interviewed and introduce them to the group. The person that you interviewed may help you. All right, so there's no pressure in the group, all right?
And this is Colleen, and she's originally from California, now a student at Notre Dame as a MA Systematic Theology. She said yes to this invitation. She knows Professor Hilkert, Sister Mary Catherine Hilkert, is a theology teacher at Notre Dame and one of our sisters. And she likes the topic of peace building.
Okay, now you would need to take your folders with you, and we're going to count off, and then that's going to send you to a table. And you're going to be working with that group for the rest of the evening, okay? So we'll start here, and we're going to do this by 5s. 1. I'd like you to take out a page in your folder that has our goal and our objectives. And this is what we're going to try to develop over the weekend, and we will come back to this to make sure we're doing what we say we're doing. So our goal, which I think Pat communicated a lot to you in the letters that she wrote to you prior to coming here, is to be a think tank developing components and marketing tools for a pilot peace leadership training program that will be used and adapted by the Vocation team for multiple groups of young adult women 18 to 45. And then below that are the objectives. And the objectives are the various components that we will be working on during our time together. So I'd like to just give you a minute to read through those to yourselves. Okay, so when we look at those objectives, we've already done a little bit of the first one, trying to build trust, respect, and relationship and participation by all the members of the think tank. And we've also done a little bit of the fourth one, which is experience ways of praying for peace. And we're going to continue to do that throughout the weekend to talk about prayer experiences. Now, one of the things that probably is very important, a very important component of any peace leadership training program, is the contemplative piece. We will have little pieces of contemplation and quiet and reflection, but because we're also trying to create other things, we won't be able to always give that much time to that. But I think to keep that in the back of our minds. And also, one of the other things we're going to do this evening is number 3 of your objectives, which is to work on the qualities and skills of a peacemaker. And we already started to do that as I heard some of you introducing one another. Okay, so in order to do that and to do it as well as we can, I'd like you to look over here about some guidelines that we'd like to use. We have a wealth of wisdom and experience in this room. We're all coming from different places. We've been educated at different places. Some of us are still in our educational years. A lot of us have a lot of work experience. A lot of us have a lot of groups that we've belonged to that have done peace building and leadership training, etc. So there is a wealth of experience and wisdom in this room, and that's what we're going to try to tap into. So as we work with one another, we'd like to just keep these guidelines in mind. And these are in your folders, too, if you ever want to go back to them. it's to kind of see with new eyes from another person's perspective. We're different ages, we have different experiences, we come from different parts of the country. Some of us have had international experience, so we're going to bring different things to the table. So we want to try to be able to see from another person's perspective. And we want to be free, the second one. Let go of any assumptions we have or any fears we have, because this is a think tank and we're going to work together. The third one, to honor our personal and cultural differences and what happens in the group. To really respect and honor all the conversations we hear and all the people we have the opportunity to meet. The next one, some of us love to talk. And some of us love to be quiet. So we all have to do both. So when we're in the listening mode, to listen intently, respectfully, and seek clarification from one another if you don't understand something. But to allow everybody to be participative, which is the last one, which is to give everyone that opportunity to speak and participate fully. And keep inviting each other to do that within the group.
It was about 3 o'clock this morning when I got up and got in the car to leave New York, and got here probably by 9:30, actually. So I sort of feel like we're here a while now, here in Ohio. But anyway, very happy to be with you and been really looking forward to this so much. Just in terms of just teeing up, as we'd say, this session, this part of the session tonight, I want to talk a little bit about some of the goals for tonight, which Anne, so lovely, graciously introduced us to already. First of all, quite concretely, in this session tonight, we're just going to kind of zoom in on sort of the qualities and the skills that we might be able to find in peacemakers, right? And we're going to be reflecting on lives of people who you have already identified as peacemakers. Tonight we're going to be focusing on Martin Luther King, and Dorothy Day. I did have Dorothy staying, and I had Harvey Milk also prepared for tonight, but way over prepared for the session. So hopefully we can get these two in. And I would also tonight hope that we can get to a part of this work where we can begin to explore something of the tension. And I'm going to say it's a creative tension, but it's a very, very real tension. Sometimes I call it a dynamic when I'm not in it. When I'm in it, I call it a tension. Otherwise, I call it a dynamic. But this is something I think we will be familiar with as people who have been in justice and peace work. And it has to do with the tension, the dynamic between responding to immediate needs in terms of providing services, right, for people who are poor, marginalized, adversely affected, abused, abandoned, etc., direct service work. Between that reality, that kind of tension, and then the tension of doing the systemic change work, right? And actually focusing in on, well, why is this happening to people? Why does this keep recurring, age after age? And sometimes we find we can do both and, sometimes we find we can do either or. Both of these parts of our work are absolutely interconnected and absolutely essential for the work of justice and peacemaking in the world. But we'll talk a little bit about that dynamic tonight. Also, in terms of what we'll be doing tonight as a part of the prologue to the session, please understand that the purpose of this entire workshop, the whole weekend, is to really engage your experience, right? So it's not about me or Anne or anybody else talking about what we know. You know a lot, obviously. And so what we're trying to do is to create opportunities to actually tap your experience, draw out from you, what you know, especially around your understanding and your skills, so that we, with you, can help shape some resources, can help shape a program that will be effective in formation of peacemakers sort of going forward. Okay, so the content that we're using tonight is really, the purpose of it is really not to teach you anything. I hate to say that, but it's not to teach, we're not assuming you have to learn anything. You're coming here with a ton of knowledge. The content that we're going to be sharing with you tonight is somewhat abbreviated. So the point is to evoke, right? To use it to evoke from you what you know, what experiences you had, the questions you have, comments, insights. Do you get it? That's sort of the way we're going to be using the content. But either way, this is really about getting content from you so that together we can shape something that's really special and effective going forward, especially for women who want to develop their skills for leadership and peace building. So no matter how much exposure you've had to this field of justice and peace work, or how much exposure you've had to the content that we're going to use tonight to sort of evoke from you, what I want to say up front is whether you've had a lot or a little, everything you have to offer by way of questions. I don't understand that. Clarify that for me. Who knows anything about that? She's not explaining it well. Who else can explain it better? Please, this is all going to be important content, for the future and the shaping of this. So we're choosing to begin the workshop tonight with a focus on persons known as justice and peacemakers, and why. Why are we doing that? Why are we starting with persons? Well, first of all, because people's stories. How many of you watched Downton Abbey? An addict, right? If you ever told me I was going to, favor a Victorian soap opera, never in my wildest dreams. I don't even watch television most of the time, but I am a junkie. So there's something about people's stories, right? And their struggles that, and the breakthroughs that they have that really cast light on something within ourselves, right? So hearing stories of other peacemakers, thinking about them, it's not just the content, knowing it. It's really about what in their life kind of casts light on our lives and helps us to understand what's going on within us, right? And also, what about their lives and their experiences offers us wisdom about how to go forward as a better human being and how to encourage other people to go forward in that best way. And, they had personal struggles, they had political struggles, right? But the people we're going to work with tonight had various breakthroughs in their life, and that's something that we want to tap into in terms of wisdom going forward. They also evidence some kind of qualities and skills that we would like to lift up, that they had, moving through, navigating struggles in their own lives. So we'd like to lift up, first of all, to recognize in our own lives that we have them too, right? So there's possibility for us. And second, that the way that they navigated them offers wisdom for us in terms of moving past obstacles and things into breakthrough, in our own future. So on your table, there is a paper that every one of you, I think, will have, right? And it has something about qualities and skills on it. So if you wouldn't mind, if you would just kind of look at that for a second. And what I'm about to do is give you just a slice of, I'm on TV, so I have to be very careful. Just a little bit of a slice of Dorothy Day's life, right? And believe it or not, I was able to find some of her testimony live, on a YouTube piece, which will be kind of neat to have her actually in the room. So we're going to look a little bit about Dorothy's life. I want you to look at this YouTube, which is only just a few minutes, and this slideshow, looking through the lens of these questions, qualities and skills, that you see with her. We'll have a little bit of a buzz session. We'll start to get some newsprint going. Then we're going to go on to Martin. Okay? All right. When I was working in New York City, in the Village, where we had an Office of Justice and Peace, I remember clearly, like it was yesterday, and this goes back about, 10, 12 years now, having a union organizer, an older Jewish guy who had been union organizing in New York for about 40 years, and his best friend, who is a Sister of Charity of New York. Now, the two of them are octogenarians, right? And I'm driving them, believe it or not, to a peace rally, up by the UN. And while we're in the car, they're having this conversation back and forth about the good old days. And I'm trying to navigate New York traffic. And all of a sudden I realize they're talking about mentioning Dorothy. And as I'm listening, I'm realizing that they're talking about Dorothy Day, who was their friend, who they grew up with, who they knew very well. And they were sort of just having this conversation about, remember something that we did with Dorothy that day. So, it's just a wonderful memory for me. But also, as I get to know her deeper and deeper, I find her as almost a patron saint, for me, in my own journey, because she's so real for us, I think. So, Dorothy, as we know, she was a journalist. She came from a newspaper family. She was a publisher herself. She was a nurse. She was a radical communist in her youth. She was also a mother. She was a wife, a partner, right, for a short period of time. She was the founder of Houses of Hospitality, known as the Catholic Worker, and which is also the title of her little penny copy newspaper that she published and often panhandled up at Union Square Park on 14th Street. She was a complex figure, nothing easy about Dorothy, whose life decisions, including her decision to have an abortion and even perhaps her decision to attempt suicide, right, places her really way out of the mainstream of the conventional lives of our saints. I sort of love this icon of her because it almost looks like her Catholic Worker is sort of a number that she got at Rikers Island or something, sort of right before her. She lived for decades, not just among the poor, right, but with the poor. And she stood on with street people, Southern blacks, farm workers. I remember as a college student working with migrant farm workers in New York State, and my father was organizing them in California, and him telling me about Dorothy Day, in her work. And she went to jail many times in solidarity with persons who were poor. She was often regarded by the church as a borderline heretic. And the church leaders often felt that she really belonged in the prison cells that she inhabited regularly. Catholic bishops and theologians denounced her newspaper, the Catholic Worker, as communistic, as pacifistic, even as they admitted to grudgingly sort of admiring her, and especially her absolute reverence and for the dignity of the human person. She worked persistently. She really professed her faith as a member of the Catholic Church. She stood there and said, I'm Catholic, whether you like it or not. This is what Catholic looks like, And in the church, she really understood that the church belonged to the poor and the poor belonged to the church. So that, she saw Jesus actually present in the poor. And I love these wonderful graphics that we associate with Catholic Worker, and so many of them just portray her theology just so beautifully. She understood that justice and peacemaking in the context of social and political realities of the day had to be accompanied by the transformation of the human heart. In other words, it's not just about the activism. It's not just about, what you do to stand up on the street, yell about, war or, try to change policies and structures, but your own being, and somehow had to witness that kind of conversion and love that you were really purporting had to be part of structures and systems of the day. This is one of my favorite notes of Dorothy Day. I don't know if you can read it. Our problems stem from our acceptance of this filthy, rotten system. Signed, Dorothy Day. So in addition to caring for the poor, Dorothy consistently demanded to know, why are people poor, right? Why are they poor? And her work engaging in social justice and peacemaking on a number of fronts occurred at the same time. And she spoke not only of creating alternative social institutions, alternative healthcare, alternative schools, an alternative legislature, but she actually modeled it. And she tried cooperatives herself, right? She tried farms and so on and so forth, trying to actually bring present the very things the very kind of structures and systems she was talking about. I love this lithograph, I guess. Her most radical vision for a more just and peaceful world order was her vision of the community, the spirit and reality of being one human family. And if you've ever been to Catholic Worker, this is a pretty familiar scene. But look who's at the table, right? So in this quote of hers here, as you come to know the seriousness of our situation, the wars, the racism, the poverty in the world, you come to realize that it's not going to be changed just by words or demonstration or wishes. It's a question of risking your life. It's a question of living your life in drastically different ways. In a way, I guess you could say that's her commission to all of us as peacemakers. So, Dr. Martin Luther King, maybe we could get a light out. Can you see him okay? He was born about 1929. He was ordained a Baptist minister in 1948. Thank you, that's good. And he married Coretta in the mid-50s, someplace around 1953, I think. And together they parented 4 children. Martin's peace work really began in the late 50s. And it began, of course, we know, with the Montgomery, bus boycott. In that time, in the mid-50s, Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of the bus in Montgomery, and thus she initiated, really the movement initiated through her action, a year-long strike against the segregation that existed within the bus system. And one thing about Rosa Parks, people tend to think there's a story about Rosa that, her feet were tired that day and she just was just too weary to get up. But the fact was that subsequently what we've learned was that this was a really organized, thoughtful action on Rosa Parks' life. In some ways, she was probably the woman who really started the civil rights movement. Now, this group, the Montgomery Improvement Association, really they deliberately chose Dr. King as their spokesperson. Now, the interesting thing is he was not chosen because of the power of his oratory, which, of course, we knew was dramatic and wonderful. And he was certainly not chosen for his non-existent peace-building experience. He was not a player. He was really not engaged, as Fran was telling us already. But basically, he was chosen because he was in town. He was in Montgomery, and he really did not owe any allegiance to any existing factions that were active, in this work. So he was really the likely suspect to sort of begin to speak to this. And after Montgomery's African American population boycotted the buses for many, many months, way over a year, it's actually started before Rosa, as was mentioned before, the city finally relented. And the campaign fueled similar actions then right across the United States. And of course, it made the issue of segregation very visible. During the boycott itself, King became schooled, sort of, in himself, in the principles of Gandhian nonviolence. And after the boycott, he traveled to India. He met with Gandhi's successors. And throughout the civil rights movement, he really became more increasingly a proponent of nonviolent sort of resistance to the violence of racism and segregation. But, really and truly, it really put him at odds, as we know today, with many other factions within the very same movement. And particularly the one that we probably know best is probably Malcolm, right? It was probably Malcolm X in terms of the tensions that they had between nonviolence. So I found this beautiful picture of him, which I really love. And it said during the Montgomery boycott, it said that one night, he was sort of sitting at the kitchen table, and probably interesting for us to know, this incredibly huge peacemaker, this larger-than-life, wonderful, wonderful human being, sort of was brought to his knees in his own fear. And he had a moment where he was deeply, deeply afraid. And that, he was acknowledging to himself that he felt empty, like he had nothing left, no gas, nothing else to give. And that might have been, yourself. Sometimes that's very frightening, that experience yourself. And he really felt that he would mislead the people, that the people would falter if they followed him, because he felt his own weakness and vulnerability just so strongly. And it's said that he probably said as much of this out loud in some kind of a makeshift prayer, I guess you could say. And although he didn't speak the name of any deity, but his doubts spilled out as a prayer, ending with, I've come to the point can't face it alone. And as he spoke these words, and this is his own testimony, the fears, he says, suddenly began to sort of melt away. The intensity of it began to melt away inside of him. And he said he became intensely aware of something like an inner voice telling him just to do what he thought was the right thing to do. And such simplicity, King said, such a simple insight, such a simple knowledge, really brought a shudder of relief through his whole body. And he really felt that he had courage now to sort of face the next day. And he calls that moment his first transcendent experience, that moment. Interesting, brought to his knees, right? So King really hoped that after all of the campaigns were over to deconstruct segregation, he really hoped that one day he could look forward to a time where he would resume teaching theology, right, Dr. King, at a university, or continue to simply pastor a church. So he was thinking, okay, when, soon this little part of my life will be over and I can get down to business, what I want to do. This, of course, we know would never happen. I just took this picture when I was in Washington for his anniversary. And he began then to realize that what he said was he had to abstain from his personal preferences, this thing about teaching theology or whatever, because he began to realize that he was part of something that was much bigger than himself. And he said, God's going to take you where you don't necessarily want to go. He had a keen insight. He was a brilliant, brilliant leader. And he had a keen insight into the structural causes of injustice and violence. And he realized that the pathway to peace would be paved by changing systems, structures, and beliefs that really caused and sustained injustice. For unity to become realized, King believed that it was necessary for all people, to find a common vision that would join them together. Becoming equal, he said. Ending racism, becoming equal, blacks, whites, is not the point in an unjust society. So what good is that, right? If we're living in a fundamentally unjust society, if we're all equals. The point, he said, was to change the society. Something that I think King really leaves us as a gift is that, his tremendous insight that diversity dwells with us and that it is not a cause of division, but an incentive really to dialogue. And unity for King does not mean uniformity. King's insight that no one is free until all are free is not just a summons to join a global movement, an all-encompassing movement, but really when he says no one is free until all is free, it's a reminder of his insight of our intrinsic relatedness to one another and our interdependence. In this quote, I think he's partially saying that each of us has the power to bring forth goodness and truth and light, no matter how evil, no matter how deceiving and dark might be our historical time. And as the scriptures say, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. And King understood Any religion which professes to be concerned with the souls of men and women and is not concerned with the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them, is as dry as dust religion. So King understood religion as both a power to transform us personally, but also a power to transform us socially, politically, economically, and culturally. That was his religion. His analysis of power, on the slide, and his use of power was not power over, but power with. Power with and for. And he understood power as a call and a reminder to all of us every day to examine how we love, how we use this kind of power. And finally, today, I think in a global economy where the bottom line often trumps the basic rights and mars the dignity and the beauty of the human person, King called for a reprioritization process. Examine your priorities and a recentering of people and living communities in an economy of life that has the possibilities of true sustainability. Right? So even then, he was seeing this kind of market-driven reality. I love this slide. The odd thing about assassins, Dr. King, is that they think they've killed you, right? Gandhi saying to King, right? And we know that the power of their word in their lives continues to live with us. Okay, great. So why don't we take a few minutes and let's look at the paper again. Maybe we can get the lights on and just let's do some brainstorming again about qualities and skills that we see in Martin Luther King.
Now, on your tables, you have a white sheet, and it says Peace Poem. There's a copy of that sheet for everyone, so you want to pass them around. But you're only going to create one. But if you wanted to each play with it before you create your poem yourselves, I thought that might be helpful for you. So, after we have listened to this litany of qualities and skills, we want to reflect on what is this internal movement in order to be a peace builder and a peacemaker. So in the first line, we want you to put a noun that would describe either a quality or a skill. In the second line, 2 adjectives. In the third line, 3 verbs. In the fourth line, a 4-word phrase. Even the prayer this morning had some beautiful phrases. And in the fifth line, a noun that repeats the idea of the first line, but in a new way. So take a few minutes of quiet at your table and play with it for a few minutes by yourselves. And then work together to create one poem per table. You'll have about 10 minutes to do this. Okay.
I think, what I want to say about this morning is to come back to a goal. Now remember that we're talking about building up some resources, right? Identifying some resources that the team can use and include in whatever sort of formation program resources that are going to be developed for women who want to learn more about how to become a peacemaker and how to advance peacemaking, right? Locally, nationally, globally, right? So toward that, in terms of this morning, I just want to point your attention, direct your attention to a goal that we're going to be specifically working with for a lot of this day, but very explicitly this morning. Going along with this idea of creating resources, this morning, we're going to explore some activity, particularly one that we might consider using. We're going to explore it and to see whether or not it's helpful for us and we could recommend it to really identify and understand the challenges and the opportunities of advancing peace at local levels, the smallest level, the personal level, the interpersonal level, the communal level, some group that you're working with, or even to help us to advance peace at the national and the global level. So we're looking at some activities, right? Some things that we can perhaps recommend to help us deal with that. So let me start with this. How many times have you heard phrases like this, even from your own being? I don't know. Just don't know. What can I do? I don't totally understand it. It just seems so complex. I don't have hope. It's out of my hands. Hear those? Right? Especially when we're sometimes confronting a challenge, right? Or an issue. So these are expressions that I think, all of us are going to recognize that really come from our own selves from time to time. And they come from others that we're working with, that we're around, even in general conversations that we might be having about what's on the news and, how to sort of approach some of these issues. We hear them from each other all the time. But I think what happens to us, even when we hear it from ourselves or we hear it from people around us, people we really care about, is that we can interpret these things. I don't know what to do here. It's so complex, right? We can really interpret that as a lack of concern for the situation at hand. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we think people are like washing their hands of this. And I don't know if you do, but sometimes I do. Okay, I'm going to tip my hand here. Sometimes we can interpret it, and here's where my impatience falls in, as a kind of default to a sort of passivity, or sometimes even judgmentally, I can say, that person's indifferent, right, about this very important issue, okay? And sometimes we can hear it as an unwillingness on our part or on the part of others to kind of roll up our sleeves and jump in, and get involved. Of course, the situations that we're dealing with are sometimes at sort of, first surface level, they seem overwhelming, right? And it's a way of us trying to grapple with very complex issues, some of these expressions that we have. So, on the other hand, I think what these sort of expressions are often sort of articulations that are really saying, I don't really know how, right? How to approach this situation. I'm not quite sure of how to sort of deconstruct it, how to understand it, how to understand immigration, right? How to understand gun control, how to understand climate change. These issues are multi-level and complex, but it's not just the big ones, right? They're often the issues that we have in the little communities that we're living in, the workplaces that we're in, and sometimes they're just issues that come up interpersonally, right, between us and people we really even care about. But our life is complicated and issues are complicated. And what I'm trying to say is, my experience is that often we need tools to understand how to approach issues, right? We need tools. How to break them down into more manageable parts. How to see parts of the problem, not just the whole problem. Because what happens? Like this, right? Who am I? How can I possibly change this? But to understand the parts of a problem so that we can begin to see what needs to be done and how to do it, part by part. Now, that doesn't mean that we're compartmentalizing or siloing things off, but we have to have ways, we have to have methods, we have to have tools to help us break things down and figure out how we're going to approach it, how we're going to contribute to the solutions to some of these issues, in ways that are very meaningful and effective. So the questions are, what tools? What are the tools? What are the activities? What are the methodologies? Right? What are the methodologies? What are the approaches that we can use to challenge, to the challenges or the problems, big or small, that face us? Furthermore, what are the activities? What are the processes? What are the methodologies that can invite participation, no matter what the skill level or set, right, of people who are involved in it, people who are affected by the problem? What can we do other than stand up there and do our analysis? What kinds of activities will really generate maximum participation to engage in problem solving across a spectrum of capacities, right, of understandings? What can we do? How can we grow understandings about the causes of the problems we face? How can we deconstruct them? Social, the national, the global. How can we break them down into parts so that we can focus our own attention and our own gifts, the powers that we have, that we've been given, alongside the focus, attention, analysis, and gift of others, so that we can do something about the challenges that we're facing today. So, this morning, what we're going to do is explore at least one activity, something we can use to help us break down some of the problems that we deal with. Now, this activity that we're going to propose, I want you to know, you can use it in an interpersonal way between you and another person dealing with a problem. You can use it in a communal setting, like at a workplace, with other people who are challenged by a particular problem. You can use it at national, larger levels or global levels, as well. It looks like a very simple activity, and it's not to minimize, the incredible gifts and knowledge that's in this room, but it's a way for you to bring a kind of spectrum of experience and skills to the same task. And for you to be thinking about, if you're going to do this with people, particularly at the local level, let's say in a soup kitchen, people who are really affected by housing, or people who really don't have strong experience of their agency, right? Their own power. You want to use activities that really invite people in a non-threatening way to do analysis of the problems that they're facing. Is that clear? So if you would take the paper, and over here, if you would just fold the paper in half so that you've got two big sections, like we did here. We just folded it. Okay, so you see you have two halves of the paper. You got some crayons there. Oh no, this is going to be one of those scary, let's draw something. Yes, it is. So on the left side of the paper, it doesn't matter, one side of the paper, would somebody just take a crayon and draw the biggest circle that they can? Alex, you're going to do that. Okay? The biggest circle you can on one side of the paper. Everybody's done it? Terrific. Bravo. Now, by the way, when we're going through this activity, I'm certainly hoping you're going to replicate it from time to time wherever you are. So that's why I'm being absolutely deliberate in terms of the instruction. Okay? So now we're going to take a minute and maybe 30 seconds. I want you individually to consider this question, right? Think about the world that you hope for. The world you hope for, personally. Think about it. Think about the world you hope for. You got it? Okay. Now, I want you, while you're thinking about this world you hope for, this personal world you hope for, your vision of it, think about an image or a symbol, not a word, not a phrase, not a big sentence, right? I'd like you to think about an image, a symbol for you that best expresses, it's not going to be perfect, but that best expresses the world that you hope for. An image, a symbol that best expresses the world you hope for. Now, how about at the table? What I'd like to do is, as a table, I would like you to come up, in the next 5 minutes with a nice, vibrant image or symbol that you can agree to that best expresses the world that you communally hope for. Okay, 5 minutes. And get it nice and dark, right? So how about a 2-minute conversation and a 2.5 minute drawing, but get it nice and dark so we can see it, okay? Just as we begin this afternoon session, I just want to make a comment about the activity this morning. And I just want to say, when you're using the activity, you know, the world that we hope for, the world that we experience it now, think of using it as we would encourage people in this peace program to use it in the specific context in which they're working, right? So, for example, if I were working with the Sisters of Peace, let's say, you know, I'm a consultant or something for them, right? And they might say to me, Arlene, can you come and, you know, talk with us? We're having a little conflict, little problems. Pete, there's a little, you know, uneasiness, you know, among us. And, you know, can you come in and help us work it out, right? So what I might do in that specific context, right, is to help peace remember what they hope for in terms of being this community, right, that came together, right, what they hope for. And rather than just talking about it, I might ask them to draw it, right, so that they're not bombarding each other, right, with questions. And sometimes the drawing helps clarify and makes more singular and more focused, right, some of what is really important, right? So, and then I might say to them, well, how do you experience your life now? Like, what's going on? You know, how is it? And they might draw a slightly or more dramatic contrasting picture of their experience, right? And although most of that second picture, the world that they experience now, can be lovely and full of peace signs and hugs and, you know, hearts and all the rest of it, you might see some you know, expressions of maybe distancing or divisions, right? People feel a little divided. Well, that's not enough, but that's the issue that you would focus on with the community. Am I being clear? Yeah, that symbol, and then get under it in terms of why is this happening, right? What is it like? What does it feel like? What happens if it continues, right? What are some of the reasons this is occurring? What are some of the causes? And then once you had that information, where would you focus your peace building, right? Supportive energy, right? Not around what's going well, although you want to keep like promoting that, but you want to focus on where there's been a little bit of a breakdown, right? And get people to make suggestions about how to recover what they really want. Is that clear? All right, so even though today we were writ large on it, we definitely want to be using this in smaller, right, contexts, very specific contexts. Any questions or thoughts about that? Okay, good. So I also just want to go back to what I said this morning as sort of a segue into this afternoon. Remember when I was saying sometimes we get pretty whiny about realities that confront us, and they just feel so overwhelming and so big, and we don't really know exactly how to approach it sometimes. And so we say, oh, what can I do, right? What can I do? And no one will ever hear me. It doesn't matter anyway. And what I said this morning is that often that's just really an indication that we're sort of struggling with how to approach it, right? How to approach the problem, how to sort of break it down, right? In sort of understandable parts in a way, so that the methodologies, the way we do that, is going to be just very important to this work of peace building. You know, having a toolkit for breaking down things and understanding them so that we can respond to that which we can do, right, within it that contributes to bringing about the whole within the peace. Okay? All right. So with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about that within our own traditions. Specifically, I want to say, but not exclusively, but specifically within Catholic faith tradition, we do have some principles. We do have some methodologies within our very own tradition that have been used consciously and unconsciously over and over again, right, throughout the centuries, to really understand problems and issues that confront the world and to make our contribution to it. So we have approaches to it, right? They're not exclusively ours, but and often many people feel very comfortable using it, and you'll probably notice that you use it almost unconsciously yourself, right?
What are some approaches? What is some framework for thinking that we can use that will really help us to approach and understand some of the challenges that we're in? Something I want to explore with you is a very, very simple sort of mental framework, a way of thinking about issues and challenges that, affect us, that we're confronting and trying to work with. And it's simply a 4-phase sort of dynamic process that is very helpful for us in terms of looking at challenges and working with challenges and trying to transform what could be a challenge into maybe an opportunity or something better. In our Catholic tradition, we sometimes call it the pastoral cycle or the praxis cycle, meaning the dynamic between sort of action and reflection, right? So, for example, you'll see that there are 4 moments in it, and that these moments have arrows. And the reason why they have arrows is because you just don't go through this cycle once anytime you're working with it in a problem. But in fact, it tends to be a spiral that we can revisit over and over again. The second thing I want to tell you about it is that you are already doing this. Most of us do it unconsciously, right? So, in a given day, you might find yourself saying, what am I feeling today, right? You're examining yourself, or you're looking at your own reality, right? Or, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? What's going on in my classroom, right? How am I experiencing my classroom or my workplace? So we're reflecting my family, right? We're reflecting all the time, sort of unconsciously, about the reality that we're engaged in, right? So once we've done that, if something's really catching our attention, right, about, our family or our workplace or some feelings that were happening, usually the next moment is what? What kinds of things do we do? Sorry? Try to figure out. You try to get under it a little bit, right? And you say to yourself things like, why is this happening? Or why am I feeling this, right? Or what are the causes of this, right? And sometimes we even say to ourselves, I wonder what would happen if this continues, right? Wonder what would happen. We do this all the time, right? We go through this cycle. And sometimes I think we sort of, depending upon what the issue is, sometimes we sort of take a step back from it. And we might say, maybe I need the help of my faith or my prayer here about this situation that I'm facing. Or sometimes maybe some principles or values or stuff I believe in, right, can really cast light on and help me understand, right, the thing that I'm feeling or experiencing or struggling with. Can help me understand it a little bit better. Okay. And so that would be the first, second, and third moment of the cycle. Does this cycle feel familiar to you? Yeah, you do it all the time, right? And last but not least, and certainly not last, okay, but the fourth moment is sort of like, okay, so now I'm, understanding some reality that's going on in my life. I'm acknowledging it. I'm not denying it, whether it be a feeling or an experience I'm having or a struggle or whatever. I'm asking myself questions about it, right? I'm dipping into sort of the resources of my faith and some principles and to help me understand it further, right? Or perhaps even guide me in making decisions about it, whether it be your family or a workplace situation or whatever. And last but not least now, I'm going to make a response to it, right? And generally, the reason why we want to be thoughtful about moving through the process, I want to make a response to it that is actually going to help me to either advance right relationship in my reality, to make my reality better, right? To reduce conflict, depending upon what the reality is, right? I'm going to take an action step to address what it is that I'm experiencing, right? But in order to take the action step, I really have to consider actions that are related to what I understand to be some of the causes, right, of the reality that I'm in. Is that clear? So that's why it's important to sort of process it this way. Because, for example, if I'm a third grade teacher and I'm coming to school every day in dread, I'm just going to use this sort of superficial example. Find myself coming to school every day in dread because basically what I'm understanding, the reason why I'm dreading is because I'm losing control of my class, right? Losing control of my class. I don't feel good at the end of the day. I don't know if the kids are learning anything. I don't know if I'm teaching them anything behaviorally. I'm not feeling good about my esteem as a teacher, et cetera, et cetera. And so as I'm doing the analysis, I might say to myself, why are they acting this way? Well, maybe I'm not prepared enough for class, right? Maybe I'm not prepared. Maybe I'm not attending to setting up a kind of atmosphere in the classroom where people feel safe or whatever, right? So why is this happening? If I take an action step, if I want to say, okay, I'm ready to fix this now, right? I'm going to take an action step. My action step is I'm going to make sure that I give those kids no homework every night because I'm going to, in the course of the day, motivate them that way. If you be quiet and you pay attention and you do your work, right? You don't get any homework at the end of the day, right? That might be an action step. Or another action step would be, I'm going to give them ice cream every once a week. I'm going to treat them to ice cream and sort of placate them, right? To sort of bribe them in a way, to sort of change the reality. Is that going to be effective in the long term? No, right? It's not. So some of the questions that I asked myself here, or some of the understandings I came to was, what did I understand was sort of perhaps the cause of the problem? I wasn't preparing enough, right, for class, right? Wasn't preparing. Didn't have enough control of the material myself, right? Wasn't really comfortable with it myself. Was very distracted perhaps in the classroom. So what's my action step going to be? Better prepared, okay? Does that mean it's going to solve all problems? No, it might help a little bit. I have to go back and evaluate it again, right? We do this all the time, right? Go back to the reality, see if my action step is making a difference. If it is, great, keep it up, support it. If not, keep going around the cycle to figure out what else do I need to know, right? And what are more appropriate action steps to take. Okay, so that is just a simple methodology. And the reason why I'm going through it is simply to assure you that you know it and it's something that we do every day. Now, in terms of justice and peacemaking, this methodology is also something very good to use. If you're working in situations of conflict or injustice, it's usually easy to help people who you are working with to really examine what it is that they're experiencing if you're in a conflict situation. So say, for example, you're in a situation where, people in your community are up in arms about an influx of quote unquote foreigners, into your community. And there's some violence going on, and that's what's really bringing the community together, right, to decide what it is that they want to do about this problem, right? A simple methodology to use is to simply walk people gently through this process. Can you do it in 3 minutes? No. It often takes a long time, but getting people to name what it is that they're experiencing, right? Tension in the community, horizontal violence, otherness, right? Some forms of segregation or outright prejudice or whatever. Getting people to name what their experience is, getting people together to understand the causes of it, to be as honest as possible. Get people to identify, well, what are the principles or values we want to live by in this community? Might not just be, some of it might be gospel oriented, but of course it depends upon, right, the makeup of the community. What are some people really ascribe to different religious principles and faiths and values? Some people don't. They're just humanists, or perhaps just try to live a good life, right? But what is it that we can agree to, that we want to shape, right, our decisions about bringing our community together, and what kind of steps will we take in order to do it? All right. So it's just a kind of a simple methodology. All right. Enough said on that. Any questions about it? I just wanted to also reinforce that when we're working in peace building, one of the things that we want to keep our eyes about peace building and justice, keep our eye on peace building and justice making, is this dynamic between charity and justice. You know, that sometimes the action steps that we take will be a combination of both. All right. So at the same time, I'm talking about that example before, where perhaps an influx of newcomers are coming into your community, and we're having some tension around it, and there's some prejudices and some, horizontal behavior, horizontal violence going on in the community. We want to effect a change in that reality, but perhaps the newcomers also need help, right, with English or education, or maybe they're being exploited, at grocery stores, or, maybe they don't know how to access services and so on. So while we're doing the praxis cycle around, systemic change, you have to keep an eye on what it is that people need, actually. And then, of course, what it is that we can do to address the fundamental causes of the problems that we're experiencing in order to restore right relationships. So it's just going back to those 2 feet of justice again as we employ these methodologies. Okay? Just to let you know, in terms of our church, because I really haven't said a whole heap about this, but one thing that we have to feel good about in terms of most of the mainline faiths is that every one of the faith traditions has a deep commitment to also bringing forth the best of the principles and the beliefs and the mores of a faith system, whether it be Islamic or Buddhism or Sufism or, Christianity, to bring forth the best of that into the world in ways that really makes the world a better place, right? So faith is not something sort of what they call atemporal, other than this world, but something that really relates to the world in a strong way. But just in terms of our own development, and remember that we're on a continuum, even as a faith system, as a church and so on, we're growing, right? We're growing in our understanding over, so many years, going back to the Judeo tradition, which the Christian tradition comes from. We're talking about thousands and thousands of years. But remember, for the Catholic Church, for example, prior to this Vatican II, that's the 50th anniversary, prior to that, for the 2,000 years before it, the church was really focused not so much on social reality, the Catholic Church I'm talking about, not so much on its direct interventions in society for social justice. It was more concerned about its orthodoxy, its dogma, its way of thinking, how it expressed to other people what we think about God, what we think about sacraments, what we think about our beliefs. And the reason for that was because we were still a minority church, right? A minority church trying to consolidate sort of its rules and regulations and its sort of identity, I guess, in the world. And of course, we're focused on trying to build our credibility. But after Vatican II, I think with the emergence and the extension of the church all over the world, the church became universal church. It's in Iraq, and it's in Argentina, and, it's in the United States, and it's in Europe, largely. But each of these, Africa, each of these contexts, right, have particular issues. And these countries during Vatican II were trying to raise the point of saying, people just can't live on prayer alone, that the church, in fact, is a moral institution that actually can affect and should affect social change on the ground, right? Because we we really need to be leaven in the world. We really need to be active in really producing and shaping the kind of world that is a moral place, that is really the manifestation of what Jesus would call the kingdom of God, a community of right relationship. So after Vatican II, this impulse began to rise in the universal church. What has this gospel got to do with the reality of people's lives? And what does that mean to us as a church? How do we deal with structures and systems and politics and economy and all the rest of it that really can shape people's life and sort of cause and sustain injustice? So the church is asking the question, what's the relationship of my faith to the dynamics of society? And as a result of that, actually, there's a strong emergence, and some of it started with the Industrial Revolution, actually, but there's a strong emergence of what we call Catholic social teaching, right? Now, we've got some good theologians in this room, so if you want to know more about it, ask anybody in here. They probably do know it. But what is this all about? It's really about the church now looking through the eyeglasses of the gospel and looking at the realities of the world, particularly, let's say, the Industrial Revolution. When, for example, machines began to dominate and factories began to grow, and the church had a new set of questions, which really, I'd like to say, wasn't really our questions initially. It was the questions of Karl Marx, who said, is it that a human being and their dignity should be subordinated to a machine? In other words, are people just meant to be part of the machinery? Are they, as they worked in these factories and toiled without regulations and so on and so forth? So Marx started to raise these questions in the Communist Manifesto. And the Vatican thought Marx was onto something, to be very honest with you. Saw his thinking, his critical thinking, and appreciated the fact that Marx was talking about justice and dignity of human persons. But what they did not ascribe to, what our Catholic faith did not ascribe to, was his atheism, right? And the church said, you know what? He's onto something. We need to articulate more clearly as a church the principles, the guiding principles of Jesus and our Judeo tradition for how we should act and live in the world so that social justice can come about the way Marx is speaking. But ours really should be based in our faith, right? So basically, the church has been, in a very dynamic way, articulating these principles, what we call the principles of Catholic social teaching, always in response to particular needs of the time. They basically have not been changing. There's not, depending upon who you read, there might be 9, 12, or whatever, but the corpus of Catholic social teaching could actually fill this entire room in terms of the writings that our church officials have been doing about particular situations all over the world. But you see these principles sort of all over again, over and over again. When we started the praxis cycle, we started with this experience, the primacy of our experience, what's going on in our reality. We should be always checking in on this. And the reason for that is that both in our faith tradition, what we have come to know and pass on is that, the God of Abraham and Isaac, the God of the Hebrew scriptures, right? As well as the God who's manifested in Jesus and in the Spirit, is a God that is not disassociated from humanity and humanity's concerns, right? This is not the Wizard of Oz behind, the screen. This is a God that is intimately involved. And so what we understand is that God is so intimately involved in our social reality. The Hebrews began to understand that when they struggled, let's say, with their experience of slavery, right? They were a people taken in slavery to Egypt, that their liberation, that political action to liberate them, was an action initiated by their God to actually liberate people. So God's desire is that people are liberated from structures and systems and realities that really oppress them. So this is no Wizard of Oz, distant God behind a curtain. This is a God that's intimately involved in these realities. Jesus, the same way. What is the kingdom of God is very close to you. When you study the scriptures, when you study Jesus's life, what you understand is that he wasn't just some kind of itinerant preacher standing up and giving nosegays all day. Everything he said was addressing social, political, economic, cultural structures of his day that was causing human suffering, right? So everything he did was to dismantle and to sort of create the world hoped for, right? To plant that idea of the world hoped for in people. So, why are we involved in social justice? It's a matter of faith, because your relationship with God automatically puts you into a covenant with the society that you're in. You're in relationship, and God is in through you in that relationship as well. I think we went through these. I think that's it.
So there are three main issues that I think most of us are real familiar about, three contemporary pressing issues, right, in our country at least. They're not unrelated to international issues. As a matter of fact, they're connected because almost everything is, right? But, the three issues that, Ann and I and the team have been talking about in terms of what's in the news is the issue of immigration, right, in our country, the struggle with immigration. It, of course, is definitely related to issues of migration, right, international migration, related to economic globalization, related to war, related to arms. We could go on and on, right? These things are all connected. But, our country is sort of poised right now to do something here that might have some significance, right, in terms of the total issue as it's known here and also globally, right? So we're sort of at this place as a country right now, immigration. The second issue is the issue of, for lack of a better word, gun violence, right, or / gun control. And, we've been struggling with this as a nation for, a long, long time. And it's kind of, most of us are just waking up to the reality that our country is pretty armed. Lots of people, lots of arms out here. And that in some ways, we're very conflicted about those arms. And very conflicted as a country, and yet torn up as a country, increasingly emotionally engaged in the issue because of the catastrophes, the human and other catastrophes that have happened. At the same time, we also know that it is, a billions and billion of dollar industry for our country, right? And we send arms everywhere. That's what we do, basically, for our economy. It's not an insignificant part of how we make money. And if that were just one, that we make money with it, that would be one issue. But the second is the entertainment issue, right? The entertainment industry, right, is all involved in it as well. And we're discovering more and more as we dig into it the connections between videos and gun sales, right? We also know that women are not only increasingly and disproportionately the victims of gun violence, locally and internationally, but we also know that the gun industry is aware that it needs to market guns to women and to children, right, if it's going to perpetuate itself. So we have this thing going on at the same time. So that's issue 2. And issue 3 is the issue, I think, that Alex was talking about a few minutes ago, which is this issue of global warming / climate change. And, as a country, we are just beginning to let that seep in because of the denial. We've been in denial for a long time about this, right? And to some degree, we still are in denial about the impact of our emissions, right, on climate and on the Earth's atmosphere. But the consequences of climate change has been visiting us very intimately. And people more and more, not just, hurricanes in Louisiana, but of course when the whole eastern seaboard gets crippled, people tend to say, what is that? This is New York. This doesn't happen here, right? So, we've been kind of dealing with these three issues in a rather intense way, and we're also hoping that some action, legislative action, right, is going to be forthcoming that will help us to work with these issues. So here's where we are right now in the, our thinking about this program and our working with you. What we're going to propose, and you may have a better idea, so I'm totally open to this. But what we'd like to propose is to see if we could begin to create together the sort of framework, the outline of some resource that we could offer, in this program. One kind of set of resources for each of these individual issues. So what would it be like if, for example, a group of you decided, I'm really personally interested in climate change. I don't know a whole heap about it, right? But I'm sort of interested in it, and I think it's a really important issue, and I'd be willing to work with a couple of people here just to put together, first draft, some outline of what we think could be in a resource that would really engage people in the issue, right? Some way of exposing the issue, some way of helping people understand it. Remember praxis cycle, remember Catholic social teaching, remember drawing pictures of things, remember all the things we did. Some way of getting people into the issue. Maybe a good film, that you saw. Maybe something that you would recommend. And, in your work together, if you were going to work on climate change, you would be doing your own praxis cycle, right? What's the experience we want to lift up? How do we understand it? So what are we exposing for people who are going to use this resource? What do we want them to know or to be led to know or to be thinking about? We also would like people to think, if possible, about what faith tradition or other principles and values that they hold dear, how that might help them move with this issue forward. And last but not least, there are some action steps that we might not know yet, but we could talk to each other about what we think we could recommend to people, right? And that might be an open action step because they'll be evolving, right? This thing will be growing, and there might be new action steps as we go forward. Is that understandable? So we're proposing that, we might do that for climate change, that we would do it for immigration also, that a group would be asked to sort of focus on that issue. And that, just as the Dominicans told stories of Hispaniola, maybe some of you know stories of folks, who are really struggling as immigrants in this country, something that you've either experienced in relationship with someone. That might be a story to tell in your resource, at the beginning. The question, what are the causes of this, using the praxis cycle? What's the reality you want people to know? What's the underlying causes of the struggle of immigrants in this country? What does our faith tell us about it? What are some action steps that we could take? Think of charity and justice, too. Okay, in both cases. Think of what we do to relieve need and what we do to really bring change, systemic change, immigration. And the third issue would be gun violence, right? And, what is it that we think would engage people, on this issue? What story? What would you like people to know about it? Remember, you're only doing an outline. You're not writing a book. You're not creating anything. You're just saying, gee, we're thinking this story might be good. This, you know what I mean? Right? Just, how should we understand? What do we want people to understand or think about why this problem exists, right? What kinds of things would we propose should be in a resource where people are going to explore this issue of gun violence? how could people be led to, what kind of resources do people have in terms of faith and principles and other things that might help them shape our response, and then what might we recommend for them, both in terms of charity and justice? Maybe charity's not an easy fit, but something maybe charity and justice in terms of a response.
We did a lot of work today, everyone should be pleased with all that has been accomplished. The room looks like it has new wallpaper. I'm not sure what an interior decorator would say about our wallpaper, but it looks kind of nice. It's our handiwork, right? There was a question about what are we going to do tomorrow, and a desire to kind of think about if you have any brain cells left that are still moving. Tomorrow we're going to try to look back over what we've done and add to skills, prayer and contemplative experiences, activities, and then again at the tradition, methodology, and practice for a peace leadership training program. So that's going to be one thing, a kind of looking back and a reviewing and an adding to. And then we're going to look forward. And we're going to be asking for more resources that you might think about overnight. It could be films, it could be art, it could be documentaries, websites, etc. Then we're going to ask you to look about groups who might be interested in participating in peace leadership training, and if you know contacts for those groups also. A third thing we're going to ask you to help us with is marketing and communications of a peace leadership program. How do we reach people? How do we make those connections? And the last is to continue to develop a resource list, of which we have a lot already from all this activity today, of advocacy groups that we could be a part of. Some, they could be local, they could be national, or they could be international. Okay, so those are some of the things we're going to be talking about. There's others, but I think those are the ones that you want to know ahead of time. We're going to take a little time to go backwards and see if there's anything else we want to say or add to what we've already done. And so that will be prayer and looking back at the skills and the qualities, some of the prayer and contemplative experiences that we've had, owning that we know, because we are a think tank, that we really couldn't give enough attention and time for the contemplative part and the integration piece of it. But that hopefully that would be built into anything that happens after here. The activities that we've done, and see if we can come up with some more. Bea certainly gave us a good start. And then looking again at the tradition, methodology, praxis for the peace leadership program. Then we're going to do these a little bit different order. The Ministry of Welcome group, Pat and Kathy, are going to come up and talk to us a little bit about what they see as next steps. And then we're going to do a little looking forward, knowing everything we've done, knowing a little bit about what they feel are the next steps that they would like to follow. And we're going to do a little activity. You're going to be moving around the room to do this. About trying to come up with more resources for a peace leadership program. And that's going to be anything from a piece of art to a piece of music to poetry to YouTubes, to anything that comes to your mind. And know that we are all can communicate with each other very easily. So if you get home or on the plane or in the car today, you say, oh, I should have mentioned that. Just send it to Pat or Kathy, and they'll be able to add it to the list. Groups who you think might be interested in participating or being part or taking the fruits of what we've done and being able to be invited to do this kind of a program. And contact people if you have them. How do we market? How do we communicate? So you're going to be asked to try to think about that for us. And then a resource list for other advocacy groups who we could be connected with. And we'll talk more about that have resources for us, or we might engage or invite to be part of the program. And then we're going to do a little review of the weekend, and the Ministry of Welcome people will talk to us again. Okay, so we're going to begin now with going backwards.
You know, as Anne was talking, I'm thinking about how important it is for us to hear all of the ideas and the experiences and the resources, that you're carrying with you. So to spend as much time as we can, try to elicit and evoke those things from you, right? So, but at this point, before we get there, what I'd like to do is to just look at the goals, the kind of operating framework, that we use to try to put this workshop together, and some of the objectives that we used for that. And to just make this one comment, you'll probably notice that there were a couple of major components that we tried to keep flowing, in this sort of exploratory workshop. One of them was to sort of build community as best as possible, to find ways and methods, maybe subtle and maybe less subtle, to try to get folks to feel more comfortable, right? And to sort of experience and appreciate the gifts and the resources, and to work as collaboratively and cooperatively as possible, to sort of evoke them from each other. So some of those methodologies, involved you switching groups, talking to each other and all the rest of it, praying together, other eating together and so on. But we do realize we couldn't give enough time to that, so in the real world, we really need some feedback about how that could be done even better, what kinds of things would actually foster better communication, foster more time, for you together to help build that kind of community. Also along the lines, you realize that the prayer was just amazingly simple, right? That, we experienced, and absolutely profound and evocative. Meaning, really putting us, I might think, more deeply in connection with this call and vocation, right? To be women of peace and to promote that in the world. So that was also something that was deliberately shaped, in ways to help support this process and to help us to go deeper, into it. So then I just want to talk a little bit then about some of the mechanics, the actual content. Although I was dead telling you that there was no content here, right? I'm trying to kind of explore methodologies with you. It's very difficult to try to develop your skills and understanding about how to use tools, right, to break open analysis of situations and to understand them better with actually not dealing with issues, right, itself, to sort of, frame that. So in some ways, we did a very superficial job with the content of the issues, but it wasn't our preoccupation. Our interest was helping you become familiar with these frameworks and to feel very comfortable and to know that you've been using them your whole life in many ways, but that they are really, really good tools in terms of doing justice work going forward. And to some extent, like you saw Anne's skills in facilitation, I have a couple of little skills in terms of teaching, and the participatory methods of teaching. But these are things that we all have. We have these skills naturally, and but they need practice. You hone and refine them like you would any other skill, and you make mistakes as you go along. And one of them might be, sometimes you might cut somebody off, right? Or sometimes you might inadvertently critique somebody and not realize that that could be interpreted as disrespect. The most important thing is to be able to critique yourself at the end of it and to be willing to, try to be the best of your ability to use your skills to invite people to say what they need to say for the sake of the whole. So facilitation is also something that, we would expect people who are interested in this work that you'd really commit to try to learn this kind of skill of teaching, right? Okay. So having said that, let me just talk a little bit about the pieces of the work that we were doing, particularly around methodology. And the reason why we're going to do this is because we're just going to go backwards, which is what my life is usually about. And we're going to look at each piece that we did and sort of offer more ideas about it. Okay? So You remember, if you can remember as far back as Friday night, you remember that we sort of broke open Friday night with this idea of exploring stories of peacemakers, right? And so we had this PowerPoint and we had an embedded video so that we could have the actual voices, of some of these folks present with us. Now, the reason why we did that was not to transfer information, although you have to remember that sometimes you'll be working with groups that may not be familiar, right? And that we want to actually build up in people a sort of community, their knowledge of the community of peacemakers, right, that have been coming through history and who are still among us and who are emerging. So if we were to do this, it's going to be really important that we continue to build the sort of the names in the community of peacemakers across genders, across culture, across ages, across issues, young and old, that we're constantly doing that. Now, the activity that we did was really along the lines, to get people in touch with peacemakers, but also for those who would participate in this program, to really think about what are the qualities and skills that these peacemakers were endowed with, but what they might mean to people who actually feel called, right, to this work. What we didn't do was and it really was one was complete absence of mind, and the second was timing, was we probably, if we were going to do this again, we'd probably give more time once the qualities and skills were up there, give people time to kind of sit with themselves personally, and sort of think about, well, which ones of those am I really in touch with in myself, right? And which ones of those would I like to develop further? And what might I do to do that, right? So having said that, I just want to prime the pump, and I'm going to stop here. And I want you to just take your time and maybe just look over. You don't have to get up, but just sort of look over. If you want to get up, please feel free to get up. And, look again at these newsprints that were really information that you provided for us, right, about other peacemakers that could be used if we were to go forward, to explore qualities and skills, as well as the qualities and skills that you actually identified in a peacemaker through your reflection, right? So we rewrote them last night from illegibility, right, to legibility, thanks to Bea. And we have them up here, and in a few minutes we're going to actually put them down on a table and ask anybody who wants to kind of gather around them and add to them. Is that clear? Okay. Remember we did the 2 feet of justice also that night? We touched on it about charity and justice, about actually responding to needs and then doing structural change, and then we kind of revisited it the next day. So what we would also ask is, you see where the paper says peacemakers, who else and how else? Please think about the charity and justice model. And if there's something that wasn't clear, if you think it shouldn't be used, if there's something that would be more helpful for people, any activity or anything you think of that might be real helpful in terms of breaking it open, please make the suggestion, okay, on that. The next thing we did the following morning was your wonderful World We Hope For, World We Experience Now. And that is really related to an activity that could be used by people perhaps across a spectrum of capacity and abilities, right? To begin to use analytical skills about in any context, whether it be their family, situations, interpersonal situations, their work situations, any life context, where they could begin to really get in touch with the basic skills of what do I hope for here, and where do I experience contrast or dissonance, right, in what my reality is and what my hope is, for this situation. And we literally did it with coloring with crayons and stuff to get people out of the head, of sort of writing and kind of equalize folks around a community project that that they could draw a symbol and really feel comfortable that it was giving expression to something that, that they would like to give expression to. So over here on this, which will eventually morph on a table, you'll see a reference to the world that we hope for, which has to do with this goal of helping to identify and understand challenges and opportunities of advancing peace, both at the personal, the local, and the global level. If there's anything else, any other activity that would come to mind that would be easily done, across a spectrum of people, or if there's some way that could have been done better, please make that suggestion, right? Any other way you could think of doing that. So we'll put that on a paper and you'll get to move around the room and, add to it. Okay. I guess the next goal that we were working with was understanding that, that there will be folks who will be participating in these workshops that perhaps don't know, some of the kind of frameworks for doing social justice that have really emerged from the Catholic tradition, right? So it's not that we're not going to have non-Catholics, in our community, but we probably will, for a large number of people, have Catholics who perhaps haven't been exposed, to this. So we particularly lifted up in one of the activities, the praxis cycle, which really comes out of our tradition, right? And we see the praxis cycle, we use those 4 elements, experience or reality, analysis, faith, tradition, and response. So we kind of broke that open, the praxis cycle. And we also talked a little bit about Catholic social teaching, and where that came from. And we also told a story from the Dominican tradition of Hispaniola. Now, I know that story was long and laborious and all the rest of it, but we use it because there's something when a community can tell its own story, or people can tell a story that has really motivated them to become justice promoters. The Dominicans are always motivated by the story, right? It always draws us into something else going forward. But people we will be working with may have stories within their communities, right? Or within themselves about their communities that will also animate them. So as you think about that element of the praxis cycle, and Catholic social teaching and the telling of the Dominican story of Hispaniola, remember we were doing it to expose a framework, praxis cycle, Catholic social teaching, and we were also trying to dip into stories from tradition to sort of break them open, right? Where people could actually see faith motivating people, right, to do something for the sake of justice, right? We also, later on in the afternoon, tried to give you an opportunity to sort of apply, some of the frameworks, the praxis thinking, the Catholic social teaching, to get you to sort of work together for 2 reasons. One, to give you practice in terms of working with the model of the 4-phase model of immersion into an experience, doing your analysis, your faith reflection, and we threw out the 3 issues of gun control, immigration, and climate change, right? So one was to see for us how that worked for you. And the second was actually to get some more information if we decide to use this going forward as 3 issues that we'd want to include. The resources you provided were really good for us, right, to be thinking about. So if there's other issues that you think we should include, right, in this workshop, or if you can think of other ways for people to practice the methodology, the framework, and the Catholic social teaching, building community, practicing it around an issue where people feel confident, if you can think of other ways of doing it, please make that suggestion on the paper that's here. Okay?
But now the Ministry of Welcome, Pat, and Kathy, are going to talk a little bit about what they're thinking about for next steps.
Thanks to God, thanks to the wonderful work of Arlene and Anne and every single person in this room. Last night, the Holy Spirit came down on our heads, and we finally figured out, we think, what it is we'd like to go forward with with all the help you've given us and we hope will still give us. And that is true to our itinerant roots. You know, Dominicans are constantly on the road, itinerant. What we'd like to have is peace in a valise. Now, I said something to Julie earlier about a valise, and she said, "What's that?" And I thought, oh my God, if the college professor who's a PhD from Notre Dame doesn't know what a valise is, I'm sunk. But anyway, it's a suitcase, all right? So we didn't want it to be in a box because we like to think outside the box, all right? So could be peace in a box. Okay. But it's going to be peace in a box or peace in a valise. And what we thought was we'd like to set forth into this valise a set of purposeful activities. Maybe it would be 3, 6, 9, 12 that could be used by women that we would gather, okay, 18 to 45, and then later used by them with others. So we see that this would have a multiplier effect, that this valise is something that you can take away with you. And then it'll be spread. Wherever everybody goes, more and more people will have an opportunity to connect. Now, some of you are aware that the Jesuit Volunteer Corps has a slogan called Ruin for Life. And they mean that in the good way, that those individuals that participate as volunteers, they're never going to be the same. And we'd like this opportunity that people might have using the peace in a valise to be similar to that. Now, I've been around the block. You can tell I'm old, right? But I learned so much this weekend with you. You know, I don't think we can ever say we've arrived, that we don't need to see that wheel and we don't need to reflect and analyze. So I think anybody will be able to benefit from this, whether they're just turning 18 and they've never had a class, never been exposed, or whether they're people like you who are already so talented and gifted and well educated and versed in this subject. Okay? And let me follow my notes here. The second thing that was very clear to us is that we as Dominican Sisters of Peace want to remain in relationship with any people that experience the peace in a valise. So somehow we feel that God is calling us to cast our bread upon the waters. Again, Julie said to me, "What's that, sister? What's that scripture reference all about?" I said, I got to go back and pray with that. But the sense is that we're not going to hoard this. We feel God has really blessed us. And we want to get this out beyond us. Just let it multiply. And we're thinking that whoever experiences this opportunity, whether it be in a 3-hour session, a 3-day session, a 6-week session once every Monday for 2 hours on the internet, however it gets presented to a given group, that they can remain in relationship with us. Whether they eventually remain single in life, whether they marry, whether they pursue vowed life, it doesn't matter to us, but that they'll go forward somehow having had their lives dramatically affected by their connection with the Dominican charism mediated through the Dominican Sisters of Peace. And we thought of them possibly as being friends of peace, so that people who experience this will be friends of peace. And then we want the participants to leave their experience of peace leadership in a valise, asking themselves, what do I do next? What difference can I make in our world for peace? So we don't want it just to be, well, they came for 3 hours or they came for 3 days and then they left and that was it. But that they're going to be hearts on fire for now, what is God calling me to do with this? Okay. And so we think that we still need your help. The day is not over yet. And each of you might still have deep down in your reserve one more gift that you can pull out of that reserve that you'll be able to give us. Because obviously now we need to put the program into the valise. Okay, so we're going to need some help. And for that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Pat, and then she's going to turn it over to Kathy. And let the Spirit now just rattle around inside you and see how you might be able to help put peace in a valise.
As Sister Pat has indicated, We need some of the gifts and talents in this room to help move this initiative forward. We visualize this piece in a box, piece in a valise, as an effective way for an individual to involve a group in the process of peacemaking. And it can help to teach people how to analyze and develop actions that help solve problems of conflict and injustice. So to begin with, our greatest need is a group of 3 to 4 people to pull these components for Peace in a Box, Peace in a Valise together into a module ready to be used by a person or a group, including the components that we've used, that you've experienced this weekend. We need help in pulling together resources that can be used in the module, and we've started on that with this morning, with augmenting or adding to the list that we already have. So we need people to continue to do that process. Maybe you might be interested in facilitating a group. Could you be involved in reviewing the pilot of Peace in the Valise program? We will have the list. I think we've already worked with the list. So to conclude, the vision that we have is to empower women 18 to 45 to be peacemakers and to become skilled in helping to affect change in the injustices in their local, in their national, and global society.
Well, I just want to add just a few words of thanks for sharing your gift, primarily your gift of presence. That's meant a lot. Your energy and enthusiasm for this topic, your desire to make a difference in your world, in our world, and your commitment to the gospel and to building peace. You are an amazing gathering of women, and it's been a privilege for me to be here. So my question is very similar. In what way might you be interested, if you have the time, if you have the energy, and I know time is one of those cherished things we have, but to help put this peace in a box, peace in a valise, or peace in the cloud. No, I mean, we don't know. This could just end up being an electronic thing that never gets printed. Who knows? But any way that you think, as we added names and as we added topics to those lists, maybe your gift would be developing one of those case studies just on one of the topics that you have a passion about. That could be a contribution. So whatever it could be, ever so small, ever so large, what Pat mentioned, some of the ideas, we will be very grateful for any contribution. Thank you.
Okay, on each table, you have a sheet, and you have a different topic. Now this time, after I explain it to you, you're going to move as a group from table to table, and I'm going to give you a few minutes with each topic as a group to add to. So you'll be writing at each table, and the gong will move you to the next, okay? So this is the part where we're trying to look forward. What will the Ministry of Welcome folks need to help them move this along? And so we are becoming a little resource to them to give them some ideas to get started with. So at this first table, they have resources for a peace leadership training program. Now we have loads already up here, but there could be more. And I'd like one person at the table just to write these words down as some ideas that might jar you as you get to this table. So one person just add this. Films, speakers, readings, music, poetry, YouTubes, artwork, immersion experiences. That's not one we've tapped a lot into. I'll come back and help you. Yet, and I think that would be a very helpful resource. And prayer experiences. Okay. The second table, yours is marked groups. These are to think about, and you might want to add this to jar memory when people get to your table, people who might be interested, groups that might be interested in a peace leadership training program. What kinds of groups would you look at? For example, campus ministry groups, parish groups, young adult groups. So different kinds of groups. And if you know contact people for the groups that you're going to suggest, put that down. Okay? Table 3. Marketing and communications for a leadership training program. How should we get the word out? What kind of communications and social media should we use, or personal invitations, to get the word out that this program is available? Okay? And then the 4th table, a resource list of advocacy groups that we could work with or get materials from or invite speakers from. These could be local groups, and if they're local, please indicate where the local is, because we have people from different parts of the country here. They could be national groups who have great resources that could help us or could provide speakers, or they could even be international groups that might be of assistance for this kind of a program. Okay? So you got the idea? So you're going to start at the table that you're at, and you're going to list whatever comes to mind, and when you hear the gong, 1 moves to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 comes to 1. Okay, so we'll do a round robin. You'll have 4 to 5 minutes at each table, and you work as a group. Okay? All right? Now that you're back at your tables, would you read through all the things that are on the sheet, select 4 or 5 that you want to share with the larger group? Doesn't mean they're better, they're just 4 or 5 things that struck you. Thank you. We were a think tank, and we did a lot of thinking, we did a lot of sharing, we did a lot of community building. So we did that, and I think we did create a nice tank of lots of yellow paper that is very rich in content and in all kinds of things that could add to making this program. So without you, this would not have happened, because it is the creativity and the peace community that was formed in the room that made it happen. So that's deep gratitude.